Hey everybody, and welcome to Teal House Farm. Today we're going to talk about my canning top 5s. I'm going to give you my top 5 items that you should have in your canning pantry if you are brand new to canning, or even if you've been canning a while but not done very much as far as diversity of canning. I'm going to tell you the 5 pantry staples you should make sure you can in 2024. I'm going to give you my top 5 kind of oddity items, things that are cool to have in your pantry if you're a more advanced canner especially, and just want some neat colors or just different items that you might not see every day in a canning pantry. I'm also going to tell you my top 5 items that I like to have for canning. So these aren't things that are essential for a canning pantry, but they are kind of neat little trinkets or canning helpers that help along the way that I enjoy using to make the canning process easier. Today we're going to include items that are both for water bath and pressure canning. I will try to specify, and all of these items we're going to look at, I have videos on how to can them in recipes, and I will link those all below. I'm not going to go into the recipes in this video because this video would last forever. So if you see an item and you're like, gosh, I'd really like to try to can that, the link below to our instructional video is in the description of this video, so you'll be able to find it real easy. And if you're curious about how we use these items in our everyday eating and family menu type life, I also have a playlist of canning pantry cooking where I think there's almost 100 videos on it using a whole wide array of home canned items. And I just show how, in daily life, what recipes we use these for. So when you look at something, you say, that's really cool, but how on earth would I use that when I eat? Like, how do you eat that? And you can go look up the recipes and see really simple ways to use some of these items. To get us started though, I always get asked about my basic equipment. So I'm going to show you the canners that I have. I do not own any expensive equipment. So none of these canners or items are more, I think the most expensive one cost about $130 when I bought it. There are some amazing canners out there that are American made, that are 100% metal. They don't have any plastic or rubber parts. They are extremely expensive, and I'm not saying they aren't worth that, but that is not something I can afford. So if you're looking for affordable ways to do reliable canning, these are your items. These are items, I've had all of these items at least 4 years, maybe 5 years. Some of them I've had 10 years. So they have good longevity and they're very affordable. So for water bath canning, I have a granite ware. This is a large water bath. I'm actually not sure on the size. I think this is a 20 quart. It is larger than the ones when you are at Walmart. If you look what's on the shelf, this is bigger than what they have typically. So this one was ordered, and I'll link the same size one below on Amazon. If you are looking to get started cheaper with water bath canning, this one here is going to run you about 50 bucks. You can get cheaper ones at Walmart. They are going to be smaller, which means you won't be able to do nearly as many jars at one time. But if that's the difference between canning and not canning at all, then go ahead and buy the cheaper one. Also, if you are brand new to canning and just don't have really any money to invest, I have a video about how to water bath can without even buying a water bath canner. That's safe, follows USDA recommendations. It's not any sort of rebel canning. I'll link that video below too, because you might already have things at home where you can go ahead and get started with water bath canning without having to purchase anything. But if you have the money, you can spend 50 or 60 bucks. I recommend going big. You will thank yourself later because you can get a lot more done in one batch. For pressure canning, I have 2 canners. I'll show you the least expensive one first. This one I've had maybe 7, almost 8 years. It was given to me as a gift. It's a little bit, needs a little bit of a wipe down, I apologize. This is a Tefal weight or dial gauge canner. And what that means is that instead of a weight you plop on top, it's got this dial that you close down when you're ready to build up pressure. This one usually costs right at $100 on Amazon. It is a 23 quart. That does not mean that you can fit 23 quart jars in it. It means the total volume of liquid it can hold is 23 quarts. Holds 7 quart jars, or because pint jars are a little bit smaller. I think you can actually hold 16 because you can stack them on top of each other and they're not quite as wide, so you can fit more on the bottom row. This one, it works great. It's reliable. The negative about it is the dial, the gauge here. Excuse me, not the dial, the gauge. It's a little bit harder to read. It doesn't have specific numbers. It just has 1, 2, 3, and 2 is about 10 pounds of pressure. And you really got to look close when you're watching your pressure because those little dots are tiny. So that's kind of one thing that I don't like quite as much about it. And the other thing is that if you need replacement parts for this canner, since it is manufactured and sold out of China, it takes a really long time. It took me months and months and months to be able to replace this gauge when one of my children was messing with the lid, which they shouldn't have been doing, but they dropped it and they cracked my gauge and I had to get a replacement. It's a cheap part. It was like a $20 or $30 part, but I think it took me almost 9 months from when I ordered it to when I actually got it, because the first one arrived damaged, had to send it back all the way to China and wait for a new one to come back. So that was kind of annoying. So that would be the negative. The more expensive canner I have is this PRESTO, which is a 22 quart, which sounds small. It is technically smaller than the Tefal, but they end up holding the same number of jars because of how the height and width is dispersed. So 7 quarts, about 16 pints. You can stack your pints on top of each other. I like this one a little bit better because it is a weighted gauge. So you actually drop a weight on top of the chimney to hold the pressure in, which means you can use a regulator, which I'll talk about later in this video, what a regulator does, which makes canning much easier. Also, the gauge is actually a numbered gauge, so it's very easy to see what pound pressure you are at. Also, I think some of the parts are made in the US, some of the parts are made in China, but it is put together and sold out of the US, which means if you ever need to replace a part, you can get it off of Amazon Prime and have it in your hot little hands in a couple of days. Okay, now let's talk actual things to keep in your canning pantry. So if you are new to canning, or maybe you're new to what I would call like diversified canning, a lot of people like to make jams and jellies and put them up, but they don't really get into other foods. Or when they start stretching on to other foods, even if they've been doing jams and jellies for years, they feel a little overwhelmed getting started with the larger pantry. So I'm going to show you what I consider to be like staple items. Like if you are looking to get started into expanding your pantry past the, jams and jellies stage, where would I start? What would I recommend that everybody do and have on hand, because it's just really useful and it's really handy and pretty simple to do? And that's these 5 items. And then these are not in any particular order. The first one is potatoes. Canned potatoes. I raw pack my potatoes, which means there's no pre-cooking. You do all your peeling, your chopping, you put them in the jar, hot water, can them. Potatoes do need to be pressure canned because they're a low acid food, so you'll need a pressure canner for these. But canned potatoes are great on hand. You can add them to soups and stews. They make the fastest, fresh quote, right? Because this has been on your shelf for a year, but tastes fresh. Mashed potatoes. You want to make latkes. You want to make home fries really fast. Because you've already done all the peeling, the cutting, and the pre-cooking. These are already soft. Basically, they just need warmed up and mashed, or warmed up and added to something. Next up, I recommend canning broth. So this is vegetable broth. You could do chicken broth, bone broth. Pork broth is actually pretty good. That's not something you usually buy on the shelf. Beef broth, turkey broth, whatever kind of animal bones scrap that you have can be made into a really delicious and nutritious broth, and then it can be canned, so you're freezing time and putting it on your shelf until you need it. Broth is a big money waster in terms of grocery shopping, because chances are you've already bought everything you already need to make broth and you're throwing it away, and then you are going out to the store and buying that same stuff you just threw away to make soup or something. So I make my broth out of scraps. I'll link that video below, but I basically freeze veggie scraps and bones in a bag until the bag's full, and then I make a big batch of broth of whatever type. There's always tons of broth in my pantry, so winter we eat a lot of soups, and I'm not having to buy any sort of soup base or broth. I can just get right to making the soup. It saves us so much money. Next one is apple slices. A lot of people can applesauce. People sometimes look over the apple slices. I can them in a light syrup. Apples are a high acid food, so this one is safe for water bath canning. The broth needs to be pressure canned. But apple slices are great. You can make real quick apple pies, apple dump cakes. I fry them for breakfast a lot with some brown sugar and make like Cracker Barrel style fried apples. I mix them with other canned like sweet potatoes or pumpkins that I've canned to make a side. So they're pretty versatile, and if you buy apples in the fall during harvest season, you can get apples really cheap. And so putting up apples is a great way to be able to enjoy them year round at a cheaper cost. The next one comes as a pair because you're actually going to make them at the same time. But it is tomato juice and tomato scrap sauce. And so tomato juice, so this separates, right? When you buy tomato juice at the store, it doesn't separate. That has nothing to do with quality. There's just no preservatives, and there are ways to make it at home where it doesn't separate, but it doesn't make a difference in the taste and when you're cooking with it, the texture. So to me, it's not worth the time. There's a side note on that. But I make tomato juice, and then you strain all the juice out and you're left with all your tomato pulp, and I make that into pasta sauce. I season it with a pre-made package of Mrs. Wage's seasoning. The big difference between this pasta sauce and the pasta sauce that you're going to get at the store is this pasta sauce is going to have some seeds in it, and it's going to have the skins in it. So it's not quite as smooth, but it's basically free. Well, it is free if you made your own tomatoes, but you make the tomato juice, then you make the sauce, and you get quite a bit of use out of 5 or 10 pounds of tomatoes. So you put quite a few jars on your shelf. And the last thing that I recommend if you are just now expanding your pantry is a chicken soup base, is what I call it. So this is, it's got celery, carrots, chicken in it, cooked in a chicken broth, very basic. On sick days, this is a great go-to. It's a lot of broth, not a lot of material, so it's easy on the tummy, but it can be jazzed up super easily. You could add noodles or rice. You could throw in more vegetables. Sam loves it when I make this, and I add noodles, more vegetables, and then put cheese on top. It makes kind of like a hearty chicken stew taste for lunch. So this is great because it can be made into several things. And it also is great because when you are not feeling well, having some homemade chicken soup that's easy on your tummy, that's ready to go, is great because all you have to do is open it up and warm it up. Okay, on to 5 more unique items. So maybe you've been canning for a long time and you want to try something a little different. This was hard to choose just 5. So I chose 5, and maybe you already can these, or maybe these all look new to you, but let me show you some new things I've done just in the last couple of years as I've learned to add more variety and spunk and color to my canning pantry. The first one is canning cuties or mandarin oranges. So these are the little oranges that are easy to peel. My kids love mandarin oranges. They are a little bit expensive at the store depending on the time of the year, but if you hit the time of the year right, especially if you can shop at like an Aldi or a discount produce store and can them within a day or two, you can get a great price versus buying canned or the little fruit cups of these, and they taste basically exactly the same. The kids love these. We go through these so fast. I've canned so many. And every time I see a sale on these little oranges, I'm grabbing them up and canning them because it saves me so much money over buying the individual fruit cups. In the fall, when we empty out the garden before the first frost, I love canning green tomato slices. I've made green tomato muffins with these before, which taste kind of like zucchini bread muffins. And the most typical way to use them, though, is to drain them, pat them dry, and then make fried green tomatoes, which are also delicious. Canning your green tomatoes from your garden is just one more way to make sure that nothing that you're putting the effort into growing is going to waste. So it's a way to really preserve something that would normally maybe get left behind because you wouldn't be quite sure what to do with that many green tomatoes the day before your first frost comes. A new one for this year is lemon curd, sometimes also called lemon butter. It's delicious on like blueberry bread, or I like it on toasted English muffins. It's really good if you make like danishes or thumbprint cookies. And it's just a neat color to have in your pantry. This is a little bit more complicated to make, but it was a lot of fun and it came out really well. And we will definitely be doing this again. I did it with my friend Adrian, who loves to can as well. The biggest downside to this is not really cost effective. This is pretty expensive to make. I don't live somewhere I can grow lemons. I had to buy all the ingredients from the store. It would have been cheaper to buy lemon curd, but it was fun to do, and I really enjoy having this. So I will definitely be doing that again. If you've never canned onions, this is really handy to have. I both pickle them and can them plain just in water. These are plain ones in water. And I add these to stir fry, soup stews, omelets, egg casseroles, really any kind of casserole. They're great to have if you're making fajitas. I can them in half pints because I find that this is the size I use them in most. I feel like pints, that's a lot of onions. And even though we're feeding a lot of people, we don't like onions that much. So half pint is just perfect. And then the last one is what I call a turkey pot pie base. So this is basically Thanksgiving leftovers in a jar. I've got turkey, I've got potatoes, sweet potatoes, green beans, corn. This can be dumped into a pot with some thickener like cornstarch all mixed up, and then put a pastry cover on top and cooked like a pot pie. You can drain it, make some noodles and mix it in with the noodles. It'll be like turkey vegetable with noodle like in a bowl, or with rice like a rice bowl. Or it also makes a great turkey soup. Add a little more liquid, maybe a quart of your broth from the shelf, and add some noodles and you have a great turkey soup base. So this one is fun to have on hand because it's basically all of your Thanksgiving leftovers where you're like, what do I do with this random amount of things dumped into a jar? And then you can them and you can use it for several different things through the winter to make some hearty meals. And the last thing I want to talk about are just 5 cool like accessories for canning / your homemade pantry. Some of these are for dry goods, but I'll show them to you anyway. I don't have a lot of fancy canning equipment because I feel like most of the extras are kind of unnecessary, even if they are cool. And so I don't really spend money on them. But I'm going to show you a couple things that I have really enjoyed having that I think are worth spending a few dollars on. The first is an extra stacking rack for your canner. So the PRESTO canner does not come with a spare stack rack. You don't technically have to have a rack in between layers according to the manual on your PRESTO canner. But I found if you put a layer of pint jars on the bottom and you want to stack another layer of pint jars on top, if you don't have the tray, the top layers can tip over if you don't have a full batch on top. And so I'd really recommend spending the money. These are not expensive. I'll link this item below. It's a 2-pack. I can't remember. I think it might be like $12. But this, you stick, one row of jars, this on top, and your second row of jars keeps everybody nice and stable. And it's just worth the few dollars to have that and not worry about what if a jar falls over and doesn't seal correctly, because that's wasted time. The next is a regulator. I have a whole video about how a regulator works, but the really short version is that the regulator hula hoops on your weighted canner. So this is for the PRESTO canner, and you can hear it while you're walking around the kitchen. So you don't have to be standing there the whole time and staring at your gauge. If you're doing a long canning process, you can listen to your regulator, and as long as you hear a nice rhythmic hula hoop, you'll know that you are at pressure. It helps maintain the pressure. And so it gives you a little bit more freedom when you're canning. I wouldn't obviously walk out of the house or go into a completely separate room for a long amount, for a extended amount of time. But if you're just in the kitchen working on cleaning up or something like that, you don't have to feel like you're constantly having to look over your shoulder at the dial to make sure your pressure is okay. This guy just gives you that auditory reminder and really takes some of that, gives you some reassurance. And then the last one specifically for canning are reusable lids. If you had asked me a few years ago if I recommended these, I would have said, well, they're really cool, but they're expensive. They're not really worth it. Just because it takes about 10 uses of one of these for it to pay for itself. But in the last couple of years, I have noticed that the quality of the disposable lids, which are your typical canning lids, these guys, has gone way down. And I've really been struggling with lids that are buckling or just not sealing well. It's like they're made out of a flimsier material. And so I am now stocking up more on these because these are extremely reliable as far as seals go. Since it seems that companies like Kerr, which used to make a very reliable lid, are no longer making very reliable lids, and your home canned goods are no good to you if they are not sealed properly. The last 2 things are not specifically for canning, but they're things that you do with canning jars to help extend your food preservation and your pantry. So the first is a real simple vacuum sealer. And this is great for dry goods. So if you dehydrate items and you want them to last longer on your shelf, this will seal your mason jars without any liquid inside by sucking out all the air, creating a vacuum. Now, one thing I will say about this, so this is a vacuum sealer that was sent to me by a viewer, and I love it. And this is great if you're doing a small amount of vacuum sealing. This is electric too, so there's no hand pump. It does it all itself. Because it's a small one, you can do batches of like 6 or 7 jars, then you got to take a break and let the motor like cool down and reset. So I am looking at investing in a more expensive one, but this kit is only like $15, I think. So it's great if you were just like wanting to try it and see if you like vacuum sealing before investing in something more expensive. But I'll give you a tip, because one comment I see a lot on dry goods vacuum sealing videos that I didn't know for my first 6 months using this. If you're having trouble getting a seal, so this one I couldn't get a good seal. It seemed like it sealed, and then like a week later the lid popped up, and I was like, what did I do wrong? So I just have a ring on it, because these rice-a-roni mixes I make, we go through them so fast that they don't really even need to be vacuum sealed. But the reason that it didn't seal well is there's not enough air. You have to be able to create a vacuum in your jar for the vacuum seal to work. So if you fill them too full, this is filled too full, you can suck out enough air to give you kind of a false seal, but it's not enough air to like really be a vacuum to hold that lid down. So you want to only fill maybe this high, the edge of the ridge, have a nice inch below that ring that you can see where you've sucked the air out. That's really the key to a successful vacuum seal. And so if you go back and you watch the video where I make these for the first time, you'll notice that I filled the jars too full, and while I got a seal, not all the seals lasted, and that's the reason. And that's a tip that I feel like nobody really told me when I was starting, so I'm telling you now. If you're having trouble with vacuum sealing, that's most likely why. And the last thing is a fermentation, or not a fermentation top. Fermentation kits are really cool too. This is a seed sprouting top. So it just goes on top of your mason jar. And if you want to turn seeds, really any kind of seeds, but you can buy sprouting seeds. You can turn those into little sprouts for greens, for like omelets and salads and things, right on your kitchen counter and all winter long, and have fresh greens. Having a nice sprouting top like this, which makes it really easy to drain the water off and rinse your sprouts, and I'll link a video below about how to make sprouts. It's just really handy, and it makes it so much easier. And to me, it's worth a couple of dollars to go ahead and get these. Just if you like growing greens on your counter and want to have fresh greens all winter long without breaking the bank buying them at the store. Those are the items I picked out. If you're interested in touring our complete canning pantry, I'll link one of the more recent videos below. It changes every year. It grows. It's huge. At this point, I feel like there's a lot in there, so I'll link the video below if you just want to see what we keep on hand. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we will see you next time.